Why you wouldn't survive life in ancient Greece. You've probably dreamt of strolling through the serene olive groves, engaging in philosophical debates under the Mediterranean sun, or cheering for Olympic champions. But what if we told you that most of us wouldn't stand a chance up to 72 hours in ancient Greece? This is History Lens, and welcome back to our channel. Forget about the olive groves for a moment, because today we're about to explore the harsh realities of daily life in this ancient civilization and uncover the reasons why most of us wouldn't stand a chance. Now, to understand why life in ancient Greece was tough, let's talk about the place itself. Ancient Greece had a challenging landscape. Imagine a place with lots of mountains, rocky cliffs, and a jagged coastline. It was beautiful but hard to live in because these natural barriers made it tough to travel or build things like roads. The land was also tricky for farming. The soil wasn't great, so farming was tough work. Ancient Greeks had to use tricky methods like carving steps into hillsides to grow crops. And because of these challenges, there were often food shortages. Bad weather or soil erosion could lead to not having enough food, and that's a big problem. So just getting by in ancient Greece meant dealing with a tough environment, and most of us used to modern comforts might find it really hard. So to put it simply, adapting to the geographical challenges of ancient Greece would have required not only physical resilience, but also a deep understanding of the land and its limitations. Most of us, accustomed to the comforts and conveniences of the modern world, would likely struggle to survive in such an environment. Now that we've seen the geographical challenges, let's move on to segment 2, where we'll explore the demanding society of Sparta, which added even more hardships to life in ancient Greece. Now let's zoom in on Sparta, one of ancient Greece's most famous city-states, and see why living there was really tough. Sparta was all about the military. From a young age, Spartan boys had to go through incredibly hard training to become warriors. If you couldn't handle it, you weren't considered a Spartan citizen. Life in Sparta was very strict. They had rules for almost everything, like what you could eat and how you should live. Imagine someone telling you how to live your life in every detail. Most of us are used to a comfortable lifestyle, but in Sparta, you'd have to endure intense physical training, harsh living conditions, and minimal personal freedom. The Spartan way of life was not for the faint of heart. Spartans even lived together in communal groups, which meant you didn't have much privacy. In today's world, where personal freedom is a big deal, that would be really tough to get used to. Even though Spartan women had more freedom compared to other Greek city-states, they still had to focus on making strong Spartan citizens. Their lives were very different from what women experience today. Plus, Spartans were always at war, which meant they were often away from home for long periods. The constant fear of not returning home would be stressful for anyone. While other Greek city-states valued things like philosophy and arts, Sparta focused more on being strong and tough. So if you were into intellectual stuff, Sparta might not be your cup of tea. In short, living in Sparta was quite the opposite of modern life, with its strict rules, military focus, communal living, and lack of personal freedom. While we admire their discipline, adapting to such a society today would be really challenging. Another aspect of ancient Greece that would be difficult for us to accept is the limited rights for women. During that period, the role of women was quite different from what we're used to today. In places like Athens, women had very few rights. They couldn't participate in politics and were mostly expected to manage the household. Unlike today, where women have the freedom to pursue various careers and interests, women in ancient Greece had limited opportunities beyond their homes. Imagine not having the right to vote or be involved in important decisions in society. It's a stark contrast to the rights and opportunities women enjoy today. So living as a woman in ancient Greece meant having restricted rights and opportunities compared to the modern world. Forget about equality. Women had no say in politics, and their primary role was to manage the household. Modern-day women accustomed to their freedoms and opportunities would find it challenging to adapt to such restrictions. Another significant challenge in life in ancient Greece was the widespread practice of slavery. In ancient Greece, if you weren't a citizen, you were likely a slave. Slaves had no rights and were treated as property. This meant that if you were not part of the privileged citizen class, you could be owned by someone else, forced to work for them, and have no say in your own life. The stark contrast between the lives of citizens and slaves is a far cry from our modern values of human rights and equality. So living in ancient Greece often meant either being part of the privileged citizen class or living as a slave with no rights or freedom. This stark inequality would be difficult for most of us today to accept and adapt to. Many of us wouldn't thrive in a society where such inequality was the norm. When we think about the past, we often romanticize it, but the reality is quite different. Ancient Greece had a significant lack of hygiene and sanitation. Back then, they didn't have the hygiene practices we take for granted today. No modern plumbing, no soap, and no proper sewage systems. Imagine living without regular baths or showers. Imagine living in a world without proper plumbing, sewage systems, or even soap. There weren't even any regular baths or showers. That's how bad it used to be. Keeping clean was a struggle, and diseases and infections were common. To make matters worse, the healthcare system was basic, and if you got sick, there weren't many effective treatments available. There's no doubt that living in ancient Greece and having to deal with the lack of hygiene and sanitation would be challenging for us today, where many folks today are accustomed to modern cleanliness and healthcare standards. While we admire the contributions of Greek philosophy and politics, we often overlook the fact that participation in these intellectual endeavors was reserved for a privileged few. While ancient Greece was renowned for its philosophers like Socrates and Aristotle, not everyone had the chance to engage in philosophical debates. Access to intellectual pursuits was mainly limited to a privileged few. Similarly, participating in politics was reserved for a select group of citizens, excluding the majority of people from the decision-making process. Instead, physical strength and athleticism were highly prized. Competing in the Olympic Games or other athletic contests was a significant part of life for many ancient Greeks. So living in ancient Greece meant that if you weren't part of the intellectual or political elite, you would likely focus on physical strength and athleticism. The limited access to intellectual pursuits and the emphasis on physicality would be a significant departure from the values of our modern world. Most of us wouldn't have the opportunity to engage in philosophical debates or participate in the political life of the city-state. The majority of people were just too busy trying to survive. Another harsh reality back then was that ancient Greece wasn't the peaceful utopia we sometimes imagine. It was marked by frequent wars and conflicts among city-states. Living in a state of constant warfare meant that you were always on edge, with the ever-present threat of invasion or conflict. For many, being part of a military campaign or leaving your home for extended periods was a regular occurrence. If you were a young man, chances are you'd be expected to serve in the military frequently, leaving your home, your family, and your everyday life behind for a long time. The uncertainty of returning home safely was a haunting thought that would linger in the back of your mind. If you enjoyed this video, then we're sure you'll love the next one we have in store.